I never imagined that one day I'd find myself locked in a battle over the very shoreline I'd dreamed of owning since I was a teenager. But here we are. My name's Gavin Bradley. I'm 42, a marine engineer by trade and a lifelong sailor by passion. Ever since I was a kid spending summers at my grandfather's cabin by the water, I knew that someday, somehow, I'd own a piece of lakefront paradise. It took me years, long shifts offshore, endless nights poring over blueprints, saving every bonus and overtime check. But 5 years ago, I made it happen. I closed on a sprawling piece of land wrapping nearly 3 kilometers around the edge of a pristine, spring-fed lake. My own stretch of heaven, untouched, wild, private. The property came with an old dock, nothing fancy, just weathered wood stretching into the still water, its posts leaning like old men bracing against the wind. It had belonged to the family who owned the land for generations before me. A simple but solid piece of craftsmanship that had served them well for decades. To me, that dock wasn't just a structure. It was a symbol, a place to tie up my boat, cast a line, launch a kayak at dawn. So one of my first projects was to restore it. I reinforced the pilings, replaced the planks, added solar lights along the edge. I even built a little bench at the end where I could sit with a beer and watch the sunset bleed across the water. Every bolt, every nail, every stroke of sealant, I did it with my own hands. And when it was done, it wasn't just functional. It was beautiful. It was mine. For a while, life was perfect. I'd wake up, step out onto my dock barefoot with a coffee, listen to the loons calling across the lake. On weekends, I'd sail my modest little sloop out into the open water, let the wind push me until the shore was just a line on the horizon. It wasn't unusual for neighbors to wave from boats passing by, sometimes even asking if they could tie up for a visit. I never minded. As long as they respected the space, I was happy to share a drink or swap fish stories. But then, things started to change. A few years after I moved in, a new development sprang up just behind the tree line. Luxury homes, big glass facades, manicured lawns, golf carts humming down freshly paved roads. They called it Clearview Shores, a gated community that promised lakefront living, even though their lots didn't actually touch the lake. The developers had squeezed the homes as close to the water as zoning would allow, but my land wrapped between them and the shoreline like an ancient claim. Their backyards ended where my forest began. At first, it was nothing more than curious looks over fences, a few tentative waves from new faces. But over time, I started noticing the glances lingering longer, the questions turning sharper. "Is that your dock?" one neighbor once asked me, a note of disbelief in his voice. "You own all this?" "Yes," I'd replied simply, not thinking much of it, but I should have known better. When the Homeowners Association formed, I barely registered it. After all, I wasn't a member. Their bylaws didn't apply to me, their meetings weren't my business. I figured they'd squabble over fence heights and mailbox colors like every HOA does. I was content to keep to myself, my dock, my shoreline. But it didn't take long for the whispers to reach me. Neighbors chatting at the edge of my woods, strangers wandering down informal paths that had started to appear through the trees, their sandals crunching dry leaves where no trail had ever been. And then the not-so-subtle comments. "It's such a shame we can't access the lake from here." One woman sighed loudly at a barbecue I'd been invited to, glancing meaningfully toward the water. "Wouldn't it be wonderful if we had a shared dock?" I smiled politely, but inside, a knot had begun to form. I'd worked too hard, invested too much, sacrificed years to make this place mine. I wasn't about to let anyone whittle away at it with entitled expectations and veiled suggestions. Still, I told myself, surely it wouldn't come to that. Surely they understood the boundary lines. Surely they respected private property. But the first time Diana Wells, the newly elected president of the HOA, walked up my driveway with that tight, practiced smile and a folder tucked under her arm, I realized just how naive I'd been. Diana Wells approached like she was about to pitch a business deal, but everything about her posture screamed control. She stopped halfway up my gravel driveway, her sharp heels crunching the stones, and offered me that same tight smile I'd seen her wear at the neighborhood meetings I'd always declined to attend. She held out a manila folder as if it were a peace offering. "Gavin," she began, voice syrupy with forced warmth, "we need to have a little chat about your dock." I raised an eyebrow and stepped down from the porch where I'd been sanding a bench for the dock extension. "My dock?" I asked, wiping my hands on a rag. "What about it?" Diana clicked her tongue softly, like I was a child who'd just spilled juice on the carpet. It's really quite prominent, isn't it? Extends far into the view corridor for the community." She gestured vaguely toward the lake, where the sun shimmered on the water like molten glass. "Several residents have expressed concerns that it's obstructing their natural view of the lakefront. We're requesting that you relocate it about 10 meters to the east. It would open up the line of sight beautifully for the neighboring lots." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. When it didn't come, I let out a quiet laugh. "You're asking me to move my dock? 10 meters to the east?" I repeated, incredulous. "Diana, the dock's been in that exact spot since before I even bought the property. It's on my deed, registered with the county, fully permitted. I own every inch of shoreline for nearly 3 kilometers in either direction. You know that, right?" Diana's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed just slightly. "Gavin, I understand you're very proud of your ownership, but Clearview Shores is a community, and we believe in sharing the natural beauty of the lake. The dock's placement, it's exclusionary. It creates a sense of division." She stepped closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "You could be a part of something bigger. We could even grant you honorary membership in the HOA if you're willing to cooperate." I held up a hand, shaking my head slowly. "I'm not a member of your HOA, Diana. I never was. Your development doesn't include this land, and your bylaws don't apply to me. I've already made that clear in writing." Her lips pressed together in a thin line. "Gavin, you're being unreasonable. We're trying to be diplomatic. The board believes this is a reasonable compromise." "It's not a compromise if I lose and you gain," I said flatly. "My dock stays where it is." For a fleeting second, the mask slipped. Her smile vanished, replaced by a cold gleam in her eye. "We'll see about that," she said quietly, before turning on her heel and striding back toward her car, her folder unopened, her steps brisk with determination. I stood there long after she drove off, watching the dust settle over my driveway, a cold knot tightening in my gut. Something told me Diana Wells wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. It didn't take long for the gloves to come off. 2 days after Diana's visit, I found the first note. It wasn't signed, just a scrap of paper stuffed into my mailbox between the electric bill and a fishing gear catalog. In bold capital letters, someone had scrawled, "Either you're with us or against us. The lake belongs to everyone." Below it, a crude sketch of my dock, circled in red ink like a target. At first, I chuckled at the melodrama, but the laughter didn't last. That night, as I walked down to the shoreline with a flashlight, intending to check the moorings before a forecasted storm rolled in, I noticed something off. One of the thick nylon dock lines I'd tied just the day before hung limp in the water, cleanly sliced near the cleat. My boat rocked uneasily in the dark, one corner adrift. If the wind had kicked up earlier, she could have drifted free, slamming against the rocks. I fixed the line in silence, jaw clenched tight, eyes scanning the tree line behind me. No movement, no sound but the lapping of water and the distant hum of crickets. But I knew. Someone had been here, and they'd brought a knife. The next morning, a patrol car rolled up my driveway. Officer Ramirez stepped out, clipboard in hand, already apologizing. "Mr. Bradley, sorry to bother you. We received an anonymous complaint about unauthorized construction on your dock. Says you're expanding without a permit." I let out a sharp breath, holding back a bitter laugh. "You're kidding me." He shrugged, looking genuinely embarrassed. "I told the dispatcher I'd check it out, but everything looks fine from the road. You got your permits handy?" I handed him the laminated copy I kept in my workshop. "Right here. Fully approved, registered with the county. Nothing's changed since I filed." Ramirez nodded, flipping through the papers. "That's what I thought. Sorry again. Just doing my due diligence. Looks like you've got someone trying to stir the pot." "Yeah," I muttered, staring toward the HOA houses beyond the woods, their gleaming windows catching the sun like watchful eyes. "I've got a good idea who." The next few days followed the same pattern. More letters, each nastier than the last. Demands disguised as community concern. Accusations of selfishness, of hoarding natural resources. At night, I'd sometimes hear footsteps crunching along the edge of my property, twigs snapping where no path should be. Twice, I caught shadows darting away when I turned on the floodlights, and every morning, new signs of trespass, boot prints near the dock, cigarette butts ground into the dirt, fresh scuffs on the dock railing. Then came the official letter from the HOA board, delivered by registered mail. It was printed on thick cream stationery, their logo embossed in gold, as if the weight of the paper could lend their words authority. "Dear Mr. Bradley," it began, "as the owner of property adjacent to Clearview Shores, you are obligated to contribute to the maintenance and preservation of the community's natural view corridor. Accordingly, we are assessing an annual shoreline impact fee of $12,000, payable within 30 days. I read it twice, stunned into silence. They were billing me to access my own shoreline. I leaned back in my chair, the absurdity crashing over me in waves. They weren't just pushing boundaries. They were rewriting the rules, counting on me to fold under the weight of bureaucracy and intimidation. But they'd picked the wrong guy. I folded the letter neatly, tucked it back into the envelope, and slid it into the growing pile marked HOA Nonsense on my kitchen counter. Then I reached for my phone and called my lawyer. "Michelle," I said, my voice calm, steady, but burning beneath the surface. "I think it's time we had a serious conversation about Clearview Shores." Michelle didn't waste time. "First thing," she said crisply over the phone, "I want documentation. Every letter, every note, every interaction, photos, video if you've got it." By sundown that day, my kitchen table had transformed into an impromptu command center, piles of envelopes, printouts, and handwritten logs spread across its surface. I went through everything methodically, labeling each piece, date, sender, content, any response I'd made. I felt like I was building a legal dam against a rising flood, and every scrap of evidence was another sandbag. Michelle arranged for a surveyor within the week. On a cool morning, I watched as a no-nonsense woman in steel-toed boots set up her tripod along the edge of my dock, laser-level scanning the tree line. She confirmed what I already knew but needed on paper. The shoreline, every meter of it, was mine. Legally purchased, recorded, and uncontested in any county record. No easements, no shared access. My property line wrapped around the entire bend like a protective arm, cutting off Clearview Shores from the water entirely. Looks like they either didn't read the maps, she mused, jotting notes, or they're banking on you not knowing better. They're banking wrong, I muttered, hands in my pockets, watching her drive marker flags into the soil. Meanwhile, Michelle filed a formal notice with the county, reaffirming my exclusive ownership of the shoreline and dock. She sent certified letters to the HOA, making it clear their bylaws didn't apply to me, their fees unenforceable. But we both knew a paper trail alone wouldn't stop them. That's when I installed the cameras. 4 high-resolution, motion-activated security cameras mounted discreetly on trees overlooking the paths I'd noticed appearing through my woods. I set alerts straight to my phone. The first night, I caught footage of 2 teenagers slipping through the underbrush, cutting across my land toward the lake, flashlights bobbing in the dark. The next night, it was a woman in yoga pants and a hoodie, strolling like she owned the place, taking photos of my dock from different angles. By the third night, I had a full cast of characters. Each clip I saved, logged, time-stamped. Faces were clear. Some were familiar. People I'd seen at HOA functions, folks who'd sipped wine on their decks while watching me mow my shoreline. Others were strangers, emboldened by whispers of entitlement. One man even marked a tree with orange spray paint, leaving a glowing X near the water's edge. The final straw came a week later. I woke up to the whine of a drone outside my bedroom window. I threw open the curtains to see it hovering, lens pointed straight at my house. I stepped onto the porch and glared, arms crossed, as the little machine buzzed higher, then zipped off toward the development. 30 minutes later, my phone dinged. An anonymous email, no subject line, no signature, just a single sentence. "We're watching." I forwarded it to Michelle without comment. She called immediately. "Gavin, this is escalating. We're filing a cease and desist today. And I want to bring in the zoning board. If they're trying to claim shared access, we're going to slam that door shut before they wedge it open." That afternoon, a city official arrived at my request. Clipboard in hand, he walked the property with me, nodding as I explained the situation. "Frankly, Mr. Bradley, I've seen HOAs pull stunts before, but this is brazen. They have no claim here." He signed off on a fresh inspection report, validating the boundaries, affirming the dock's legality, noting the signs of trespassing. Standing beside him at the water's edge, watching the sun shimmer across the lake, I felt the tide shift. The line had been drawn. I wasn't just defending my dock anymore. I was preparing for war. I didn't think they'd be stupid enough to try something bold in broad daylight. But the morning it happened, I knew something was off the moment I stepped onto my porch and spotted the trucks. 3 of them lined up along the access road just beyond my property line, engines idling. A handful of men stood near the tailgates, all in matching neon vests, talking animatedly while unloading toolboxes and coiled ropes. And at their center, barking orders like a foreman on a construction site, was Diana Wells. She wasn't even pretending anymore. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched high on her head, she pointed sharply toward my dock as if directing a military strike. One of the workers, hired contractors by the look of them, nodded and started wheeling a dolly stacked with what looked like heavy-duty chains and clamps. I stood there frozen for a beat, heart thudding in my chest, then strode down the hill toward them. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cutting through the hum of engines. "What the hell's going on?" Diana turned. That familiar condescending smile stretched across her face. "Good morning, Gavin. We're just here to implement the board's decision. No need to make a fuss." She flipped through the pages on her clipboard theatrically. "As of today, the Clearview Shores Homeowners Association is exercising its right to reposition community access structures for the benefit of all residents." I blinked. "You mean my dock?" She raised her brows, feigning surprise. "Gavin, It's not just your dock. It's been designated a shared amenity under our revised bylaws. You really should have attended the last meeting." I nearly laughed. "I'm not under your HOA. You don't get to revise anything that touches my land." Diana sighed dramatically. "We've consulted legal counsel. The board has determined that since your shoreline impacts the view and recreational potential of our community, it falls under collective stewardship. We're moving the dock to a more inclusive location." I stepped between her and the workers, planting my feet firmly. "No, you're not." A younger guy holding a power drill hesitated, glancing at Diana. Ma'am, is this legal?" He's saying, "Keep working," she snapped, waving him forward. But they didn't get the chance. I pulled out my phone and hit the speed dial. "Ramirez, it's Bradley. I need officers at my property now. I've got trespassers attempting to dismantle my dock." "Already on the way," Ramirez said grimly. "We got a call from the zoning office. Sounds like they're staging an unauthorized modification." Minutes later, the first squad car rolled in, lights flashing but siren off. Ramirez stepped out, took one look at the scene, and let out a low whistle. "Well, this is a mess." Diana whirled around, her smile cracking at the edges. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. We're just making a few adjustments in line with community ordinances." Ramirez held up a hand. "Ms. Wells, unless you've got a court order in your back pocket, you're trespassing on private property and attempting to tamper with legally permitted structures. Step back." Her face flushed deep red. "You don't understand. This is bigger than one man's stubbornness." "I understand perfectly," Ramirez interrupted coolly. "I also understand we've got video evidence, sworn statements, and property surveys confirming Mr. Bradley's exclusive ownership. So unless you're looking to add criminal charges to your HOA's resume, I suggest you stop." One of the contractors quietly started packing up his tools. Diana's mouth opened and closed uselessly. Then she spun toward me, her eyes blazing. "This isn't over, Gavin. You're selfish. You're hoarding what should belong to everyone." I stared back, calm as still water. "No, Diana. I'm protecting what belongs to me." Ramirez signaled to his partner. "Get statements, log everyone's ID, and make sure they clear out." He turned back to me with a sympathetic nod. "You'll want to press charges for trespass and attempted property damage. We'll back you up." As the workers slinked away and Diana stood fuming at the roadside, I looked down at my dock, untouched, resolute, shining beneath the morning sun, and felt the weight of the battle shift again. The war wasn't over, but now it was on my terms. It didn't take long for the lawsuit to arrive. Less than a week after Diana's little dock invasion failed, a courier delivered an envelope thicker than a phone book. "Bradley V. Clearview Shores HOA," the header read, in bold black letters. Inside, pages upon pages of accusations, claims, supposed bylaws, and declarations asserting that my shoreline, my dock, and the very lakefront view belonged, by natural extension, to the community at large. They were suing for access rights, demanding shared use of the dock, and, most laughably, seeking back payment of the so-called shoreline impact fees they'd invented. I sat at my kitchen table flipping through the nonsense while Michelle reviewed it beside me, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. She let out a dry chuckle. "Well, I'll give them points for creativity. But legally? This thing's a house of cards." She tapped the stack with a polished nail. "We'll countersue. Trespassing. Attempted property damage. Harassment. And since they tried to unilaterally assign you HOA fees without jurisdiction, we're throwing in attempted fraud." 2 weeks later, we stood in a courtroom packed wall-to-wall with Clearview Shores residents. Diana sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by 2 lawyers, dressed in an immaculate white blazer that practically screamed self-importance. Across from her, I sat quietly beside Michelle, watching the proceedings unfold like a slow-burning play. Reporters filled the back row, local news cameras setting up outside. Apparently, word had gotten out that the HOA president was trying to commandeer private shoreline under the guise of community stewardship. Their attorney opened with a grand, sweeping narrative. At the heart of this case, he declared, is a question of fairness. Mr. Bradley's ownership, while technically legal, represents an unnatural monopolization of shared natural resources. He spoke of community, equality, the spirit of Clearview Shores, as though I'd barricaded myself behind iron gates, hoarding a treasure that rightly belonged to the people. Michelle leaned over and whispered, "They're arguing emotion because they've got no law." When it was our turn, she rose smoothly, a blade in a tailored suit. "Your Honor," she began, "we don't dispute that my client owns the shoreline. In fact, that's exactly the point. He owns it. Legally, exclusively, and without encumbrance." She laid out the survey maps, the property deeds, the zoning records, the inspection reports, all certified, notarized, beyond contestation. Then came the security footage. Strangers trespassing, contractors attempting to tamper with the dock, the drone hovering outside my bedroom window. Each clip played on the court monitor, each timestamp etched into evidence. I watched Diana shrink deeper into her chair with every exhibit. When Michelle reached the cease and desist letters, ignored. The police reports, documented. The official statements from zoning officials affirming no easement, no shared access, no obligation to comply with HOA bylaws. The judge sat back, arms crossed, expression turning cold. "Ms. Wells," the judge said finally, peering down from the bench, "are you aware that your association's jurisdiction ends at the legally recorded boundary of Clearview Shores?" Diana's mouth twitched. "Your Honor, we were acting in the best interest of our residents." "No," the judge cut her off sharply. "You were overstepping. Grossly. This isn't community stewardship. It's attempted theft under color of authority." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge turned to the attorneys. "I'm dismissing the HOA's claims with prejudice. Mr. Bradley's ownership stands. Furthermore, I'm granting the counterclaim for trespass, harassment, and attempted property damage." He glanced at the notes before him. The HOA is ordered to pay $750,000 in damages, including legal fees and costs of additional security measures necessitated by their actions. Diana's face drained of color. Her lawyer buried his head in his hands. The gavel struck the bench. Just like that, it was over. Michelle exhaled slowly, gathering the files. "Congratulations, Gavin," she said quietly, smiling as we stood. "You didn't just win a case, you shut them down for good." I looked across the courtroom as Diana's neighbors shuffled away from her, avoiding her gaze, whispering to one another, their president now a pariah. I'd won the battle. But more than that, I'd reclaimed peace. In the days that followed, the neighborhood grew oddly quiet. No more letters, no more strangers creeping through the trees, no more drones buzzing at my windows. It was as if the entire saga had been scrubbed from existence, leaving only a tense silence hanging over Clearview Shores like morning fog. But I knew better. Their silence wasn't peace. It was surrender. I spent the afternoon after the verdict walking my shoreline, tracing the same path I'd walked 1,000 times before. But this time, it felt different. Every step carried weight. Every footprint, a quiet victory. I paused at the dock, running my hand along the smooth wood, still scarred from the attempted sabotage, but standing strong. The sun reflected off the water in ripples of gold, a mirror of calm. I sat at the bench at the end, cracked open a cold beer, and just watched the lake breathe. For the first time in months, I wasn't watching for shadows. The next week, I had new signs posted, metal, bolted deep into the trees, their lettering clear and unapologetic. Private shoreline. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. I added cameras with higher resolution, doubled the locks on my gates, installed motion lights along the most used illegal paths. Michelle insisted on every measure. Not paranoia, she told me, just insurance. And then, because it amused me, I ordered a custom plaque and mounted it beside the dock stairs. Simple, black slate, engraved with one line. Brought to you by $750,000 of HOA mistakes. Every time I passed it, I couldn't help but smile. Word got around fast. The local paper ran a piece titled, "HOA Overreach Ends in Costly Court Defeat," with a photo of Diana leaving the courthouse, flanked by reporters. Rumors swirled that she'd been ousted as president within a week. Some said she'd quietly listed her house for sale. Others claimed she was facing separate charges for financial mismanagement of HOA funds. I didn't bother confirming. Frankly, I didn't care. What mattered was that no one from Clearview Shores so much as set a foot near my shoreline again. Even from their backyards, they kept their distance, casting glances but never daring more. Occasionally, a neighbor would wave cautiously from their deck. I'd nod back, not out of friendliness, but out of finality. The message had been received. One evening, as I watched the last light fade beyond the trees, I realized something else. I hadn't just protected my dock or my shoreline. I'd defended the very principle that brought me here in the first place. The freedom to build something with your own hands. The right to enjoy the quiet without someone claiming a piece of it just because they want it. I leaned back on the bench, closed my eyes, and listened to the water lapping gently against the pilings. Nobody was going to challenge me again. And if they tried, well, I hoped they'd bring a check for $750,000 with them, up front.